the Hogwarts Library. Willow Kensington stared up at the immense shelves in wonder. There were so many books. How would she find time to read them all? The thought brought a note of sadness to her elation. Immediately after, she felt a fiery determination. Challenge accepted. Willow reached out for the book directly in front of her and paused, her hand hovering over the spine. If she started at a random place in the shelves, it would be impossible to keep track. She considered asking the librarian, Madame Pince, for advice on where to begin. But the witch had not seemed approachable. When Willow first entered the library, Madame Pince had stared at her as she stared at every student, as a potential threat. No, this was Willow's journey. She would, figure it out on her own. The sorting hat had barely brushed Willow's head before sorting her into Ravenclaw. It was the one she had been hoping for, based on everything she had read about the school houses. She decided to approach her gargantuan task of being the first Hogwarts student to read every book in the library, as any Ravenclaw should. She walked to the first shelf on the left by the entrance and crouched down, reaching for the first book in the bottom left corner. The book was spotless. Willow assumed it was kept that way by magic. She had expected cobwebs or other signs of neglect on the lesser read books, but a quick glance along the long lines showed her every volume was surgically clean, if not always in perfect condition. She had heard rumours that Madame Pince placed a curse on those who defaced her precious pages, and Willow didn't yet know enough about curses to dispute it. She took the book, titled Elementary Magical Defensive Skills by Abaster Arding, to a comfy chair by the window, and opened its cover. As she scanned the glossary, something caught her attention in the evening sky. She gasped, and she felt more than saw Madame Pince's head appear from behind a shelf, glaring at her. Willow made an apologetic face and stared at her book until the librarian slinked away. When she had gone, Willow stared out of the window, searching for the source of her shock. There it was again, silhouetted against the sunset. A skinny, black, horse-like creature with scaly wings. She knew what it was, having read about them over the summer. Seeing one in real life was much more haunting than a picture. She thought of her mother, whose death was the only reason Willow could now see the thestral soaring through the air, much more elegantly than she would have expected. Willow folded the book closed in her lap, its alluring contents temporarily forgotten. She peered out at the Hogwarts grounds, still not quite able to believe she was here. She wasn't the only Muggle-born witch among the new first years, who had only arrived the night before. She doubted she was the only one raised by a single parent. She knew, having spoken to the other Ravenclaws at the house table during dinner, that they shared her love for reading. Why, then, did she feel that she didn't belong? That at any moment, this magical dream could be taken from her? She wondered if any of the other first years currently felt this way. Probably. Willow glanced up as footsteps sounded next to her. A boy walked past, a fellow first-year Ravenclaw. He met her eyes and smiled. She flashed an awkward grin and quickly returned her gaze to the window. She had always been shy. Since she could understand words on a page, she had preferred reading to anything else. She and her Muggle friends back home had quickly drifted apart when she told them she was going away to a new school, one where she would stay on site for most of the year. She didn't miss them. She had always known she was different. The unexplainable things that happened to her growing up didn't happen to anyone else. She expected, now that she was surrounded by people who understood, to make real, lasting friendships. She was well aware that she wouldn't make them by spending her evenings camped out in the library, but there was plenty of time for that. This was day one. Her classes were over for the day. She had already finished her homework and eaten a rushed dinner. She had the whole evening to absorb as much as she could. She opened the book once again, turned to the first page and began reading. The first lesson, to my unexperienced readers, is this: if you can avoid a duel, do. Attempt diplomacy first in all things. Willow chuckled to herself. This seemed like odd advice in a book about defensive spells. She wondered if the author had been a Hufflepuff. There it was again, the Thestral. Willow's heart suddenly ached for her father. Tobias Kensington doted on his daughter when he was home. This wasn't often. On most days, his construction site manager job had him leave the house before Willow woke up and arrive home after she fell asleep. The majority of the childcare, since Willow's mother had died 5 years before, had been carried out by her grandmother. There was no doubt that Willow had Esmeralda to thank in large part for her devotion to books. Her nan, having limited mobility in her advanced age, had taken Willow to the local library on weekends, where she herself had been content to read and sip tea. At first, Willow had found these excursions boring, being too young to understand the sheer joy that could be found from squiggly lines on paper. But Nan was patient, taking the time to teach Willow. Eventually, the symbols made sense, and within months, Willow was the best reader in her class. She missed her grandmother, but she knew she would be okay. It was Dad she was worried about. With only his mother for company in the house, sweet as she was, Willow fretted about her father's well-being. She wanted him to have a life beyond her. If all he looked forward to for the next 7 years were a few weeks of time with her at Christmas, Easter and summer, she doubted he would be the same at the end of it. She hoped, with all her heart, that he did not throw himself harder into his work, as he had done when her Hogwarts letter came. He did it all for her, she knew. He worked so she could be safe and comfortable and never have to worry about where food came from. She had assured him it would be different from now on, now that she would be trained to use magic. Outwardly, he was as supportive as could be, but she knew he was skeptical of the whole enterprise. He was a man used to working with his hands, to building things the hard way. If it could all be done with the flick of a stick, he had said at first, what was the point? Nevertheless, she looked forward to making his life easier, when she eventually became a fully qualified witch. Willow shook her head. Now was not the time to be worrying about such things. She was at Hogwarts. The castle's many mysteries waited for her to explore them. But first, back to Arding's book.